Hello and welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time, to the NOTCAST number 334. Today is Saturday the 18th of November 2023, and because I'm a man of advancing years, I really know how to live on a wild Saturday night by sitting indoors and talking to my phone to upload to YouTube my thoughts about an album that is now older than me. So released in 1973 and having sold 50 million copies worldwide, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. 21.8 million of those copies have been sold in America alone, which, given the population of the United States, means that approximately 1 in 10 people will have a copy of Dark Side of the Moon, which is statistically accurate, but in reality highly unlikely. There are, like many people, undoubtedly people that have bought multiple copies of Dark Side of the Moon. I have 5, so I am by no means the worst offender in that respect. There is a chap that collects just variants of the first Velvet Underground album, and I think has something like 850 different versions of that record. And I don't aspire to that. I do wonder sometimes, what am I going to do when I get all the records that I've ever wanted and own everything? It'd be like a Pokemon. Is it going to make new ones, or am I just going to give up? On the other hand, I'll probably be extremely old and I probably won't care at that point. So there you have it. So Dark Side of the Moon, you'll almost definitely, by virtue of having been alive in the UK and the US and the world full stop over this period, have been assigned a copy of this by the British government or your respective local government in your respective local territory. And you'll be sent a copy to collect and keep, much like the Adele albums and the Coldplay records, and probably a Red Hot Chili Peppers album. Doesn't mean you have to keep them. You can throw them in the bin. That's quite all right with me. Of the bands that I dislike, and by the way, this notcast comes from a place of love. I try to talk about the records that I do like. So those of you that have seen the previous ones where I talk about Roger Waters' revision of Dark Side of the Moon in less than glowing terms, I try really hard to talk about the music that I do like, because I think positivity is absolutely the best thing in the world. But on occasion, if you don't like something, you do have to say that you don't like it. Of course, if you don't like this, don't say anything. I figure by the viewing numbers, not that many people do like it anyway, and that's okay. Everyone has to have their niche. This is mine. So, Dark Side of the Moon. I've rambled on a bit. Let's get straight to it. So, 50 million copies of this sold in the world, and I have 5 of them. So I have an original 70s vinyl edition, which is here. This is pretty beat up. I have a couple of the CD editions of it. I have the mobile Soundlabs Fidelity version on cassette. This is worth a whole £3.50 on Discogs. I wish it was the vinyl, because then that would probably be worth about £500, then I'd sell it. But I think the previous owner wanted the cassette for their car. And I have the original pre-barcode, about 1986 CD edition of the album. And because I am space and time efficient, I also have the 1992 remaster of Dark Side of the Moon, which was then later put into the Shine On box set and part of the 1994 Doug Sachs remastering program, which took place. So instead of going all that and going through all the history of it, I'll show you all these versions anyway. Let's get cracking with Dark Side of the Moon. Just go straight for it, straight in. So, although it sold 35 million copies by 2004 and allegedly 50 million copies by 2023, when this was released on the 1st of March 1973, I think this was widely regarded as the best Pink Floyd album. And it probably is the best Pink Floyd album up to that point, although it's not my favourite. My favourite is Obscured by Clouds, because I have to be awkward and difficult. But Dark Side of the Moon is I completely understand why it is such a popular record. I mean, first and foremost, obviously Pink Floyd were in an obvious ascent at that point. They were getting bigger and bigger, playing bigger places, becoming more and more successful. And every band has a record. If they're a successful band, for U2 it's Joshua Tree. For Def Leppard, it's Hysteria. I have to think of a band that isn't old now, haven't I? Well, I can't. For Pink Floyd, obviously it's Dark Side of the Moon. Everything was leading up to that point, and everything after Dark Side of the Moon is a response to the events after that point as well. So this is kind of like the pivotal album in the band's body of work. It's the moment at which probably I think the band were their most cohesive in their original 4-piece configuration with Roger Waters on bass, and it's the album by which most people know most of their songs. Although, surprisingly, in the UK, they didn't release any singles, because after the appalling chart position of Pointing at the Sky, which got to some low number, which didn't please Pink Floyd's ego, they decided that they weren't going to release any singles in the UK for the foreseeable future, so that they couldn't have any flops, effectively saying, we're going to take our ball and we're going to go home, which is why almost all of the foreign singles, all of the singles released between Point Me at the Sky and Another Brick in the Wall were not released in the United Kingdom. So all the singles which I've shown you for things like Free For, One of These Days, for example, not UK issues because they weren't released officially in the UK. Talking of which, since Pink Floyd have done box sets of near enough everything, isn't it about time that Pink Floyd did a 7-inch singles box set and reissued them all? Because that way it would see, at last, only 50 years after release in France and the rest of the world, the release of Money and the follow-up single, Time, backed with Us and Them. Both of these are the international editions. I think Us and Them I think that might be an American copy. And my copy of Money is, by the look of it, French, because it's on Pathé Marconi Records. And these were the two big songs, although, of course, British radio were playing those songs. Anyway, they just weren't going, here's the new single by Pink Floyd. This is from the album Dark Side of the Moon, kids. So go play it. And then, of course, obviously Led Zeppelin were doing a similar tack, not releasing singles that people would buy the albums, which was pretty forward thinking, I think. So released on the 1st of March 1973, Dark Side of the Moon is the resultant summation of the band's previous work, the obvious ascent to what they've been doing. So in 1972, as I mentioned in the previous episode, they had been touring, and they've been touring a new song cycle called Eclipse, a piece for assorted lunatics. And there are a number of unofficial releases from that period. Here is the Dark Side rehearsals with a period inappropriate photo from 1988 on the front. This features the first live performance of Dark Side of the Moon, which was incomplete, at the Brighton Dome on, I think, the 20th of January 1972. Here is On the Run, recorded in Boston. Disc 1 is all the Dark Side of the Moon material. This is May the 4th, 1972. Here's Say Goodbye to Hollywood, which again features Dark Side of the Moon, recorded in September 1972. Here is yet another one, Eclipse, recorded in Boblingen, which I've never been to, actually. I hope it's a nice place. And this one, Any Colour You Like, recorded in Frankfurt the day before in 1972. Now, we haven't had any unofficial copyright extension releases yet from 1973 because the year is not yet complete. Sometime shortly, Pink Floyd will probably upload a copyright dump of badly recorded audience quality recordings to prevent people from releasing them as unofficial grey market CDs. But those grey market CDs will be pressed and they'll be released in early 2024, undoubtedly, because I've seen the business model from previous years. And you will have a short run of one-time pressings of 1973 bootleg CDs, effectively acting as copyright exploitation releases. So Dark Side of the Moon was played live for over a year before it was released. And the album that was released in 1972, the soundtrack to Obscured by Clouds, was recorded and released in the gaps in between the Dark Side of the Moon tour. So Dark Side of the Moon was actually written before Obscured by Clouds. And when you think about the chronology of that, in much the same way as I think Abbey Road and Let It Be were not released in the order in which they were recorded, you kind of have an album that kind of exists a little bit outside of chronology. Not that anyone really cares. As far as anyone's concerned, Dark Side of the Moon is Pink Floyd's 1973 record, and Obscured by Clouds just came out first and was an earlier record. 1972 was also a busy year for the band because they were obviously refining and honing Dark Side of the Moon live on stage, adding songs as they wrote them. So Eclipse and Brain Damage, the last two songs on the album, were not added until some point in the American tour. It was recorded in 4 sessions using 16-track recorders, I think Abbey Road in January and February 1972, October 10th to the 17th and 25th to 27th 1972, and then finally finished between the 9th of January and the 1st of February 1973. Abbey Road. At that point, less than a month before the album was due to come out, or more correctly, a month to the day it was finalised. So these long lead times that we have now, where you finish the album and you have to wait 9 months for the album to come out, that's not how the world worked at that point. There were more pressing plants, there were more options, and there was a shorter release gap between finalisation and release, which of course changed some point a few years ago, but then seemed very straightforward actually, as you could finish a record and it could be in the shops a month later. It also had a change in the band's recording process, so they used the 16-track studios. They had Doris Troy on backing vocals, and Claire Torrey, who did additional vocals for The Great Gig in the Sky. On tour, they replaced Doris with 3 backing vocalists. They also had Dick Parry, who played with the band on saxophone on, I think it's Money, possibly Us and Them as well, who also went on tour. And Dick was part of what was called the Cambridge Mafia, which is an uncharitable way to describe the people from Pink Floyd's past that grew up with them, went to the same schools, colleges and so on and so forth. And Dick Parry played with David Gilmour until 2006, and he didn't tour with David in 2016. And what we had for the album was apparently there's a quad mix of it that's available on the Immersion edition. It was on I think a 4-track tape or something, 8-track tape or something, possibly. And then also there was Alan Parsons, who'd been the tape operator for Atom Heart Mother, then moved into the process of recording, engineering, and generally having an integral role in the studio side of creating Dark Side of the Moon. And the album didn't arrive fully formed. It didn't arrive complete. There was a meeting in Nick Mason's kitchen in 1971. Roger posited the idea of creating an LP that dealt with the universal themes of life in the modern world, and then creating songs that dealt with things like money, conflict, love, religion, travel, and so on and so forth. And those songs were obviously worked up and finalised on tour. In those days, there was nobody that was filming a whole show and then uploading it to YouTube before breakfast. If it was there, it might have circulated on the bootleg cassette market, but generally speaking, a band could play a song live hundreds of times for a year or so before it was released, get it right on stage. It would be new every time the band played it to the audience. There wouldn't be a case of, as one does now with unreleased material, uploading it to YouTube and then watching it the next morning and going, that's not very good, is it? And then finding that it's never played again. So it kept the songs fresh in the eyes of the audience and extended the band's touring sequence. There was also a process of evolution in the recording. So there were multiple iterations of certain tracks. Multiple mixes were created before the final one was agreed on by the band. And these multiple mixes slowly kind of congealed into a cohesive whole. And what we did have with Dark Side of the Moon was, and I think as Roger described it, was to strip away all of the artifice and the obstructions and just get straight to the reality of the situation, and to write clear, direct songs that spoke obviously to people but were very, very durable. Absolutely worked, by the way. And you had this phenomenal record. Now, as you may, if you've been watching this for a long time, firstly, congratulations. Secondly, thank you for sticking with it over the past 3 and a bit years. But what we do have is one of the very early ones. I was talking about LP sequencing and how album sequences are super, super important. So putting the right songs in the right order, and that makes all the difference when it comes to an LP, because if you don't get the right songs in the right order, what you end up with is something that doesn't quite, like as Lebowski said, the rug held the room together, man. The songs hold the album together. And if you have the wrong songs in the wrong place, you don't have such a good album. The sequencing on Dark Side of the Moon is absolutely perfect. It doesn't feel like 10 separate songs. Well, technically, it's probably only about 8 separate songs. It feels like it's a symphony or an opera or a narrative that's constructed with ebbs and leaps and flows, and the songs blend perfectly into each other. The transitions between them are sometimes invisible, and you can only tell when you actually pass that point and you look back and go, oh, that's a new song now. Especially side 2 flows as if it's one complete track. all the way through, that's made out of separate parts, separate, distinct, but also at the same point part of a cohesive whole that absolutely works. So the sequence of Dark Side of the Moon is one of the few albums I haven't tried to resequence, because they got it right to start with. They got it right on the roads, and they didn't screw it up at any point all the way through. There is, and I guess you could be charitable and say there is actually an official alternate sequence to the album, because Roger, when he toured in 2018, he played the second side of Dark Side of the Moon, but he inserted a song called Smell the Roses in the place where Any Colour You Like is. So you could think about it like that. So if you have the 2018 Us and Them DVD or Blu-ray, go in and give it a watch in that format. So the album is 10 distinct songs. Can't always tell the difference between the two, but very, very clear. So Speak to Me, first track, side 1, track 1. I should open the gatefold, by the way, considering it's been 16 minutes open. And you kind of have this wonderful classic cover here by Hypnosis Storm Ferguson. Technically, by the way, this isn't actually correct. There are 6 colours on the album. If you actually split a prism, there would be a 7th colour, and I think that colour would be pure white. But because pure white is here on the album, they've decided not to replicate it on this end. And by the way, the album works very sneakily in a kind of a cohesive kind of circular fashion. So actually, if you open out the gatefolds, what you can see is effectively you could put 2 copies together. Let's quickly have a look at that, see how that goes. Oh, see, almost exactly the same. Oh, isn't this exciting? This is the stuff that's geek catnip. And it kind of folds out as 2 covers, and you could go, well, actually that's the back cover, and although the prism is slightly bigger on the back cover, it still kind of holds the same kind of effect. As if you looked at that, everyone would go, well, all right, it's the wrong way round, but aside from that, it's absolutely that as well. And then on the inside, of course, the prism, which is reflected by the heartbeat, a heartbeat that is effectively the opening to the opening track, Speak to Me. And Speak to Me is, although it's solely credited to Nick Mason, I'm sure a certain grumpy bass player will tell you that actually Nick had nothing to fucking do with it. It was all me and a tape recorder and a sequencer. But Speak to Me is assembled using noises and sound effects from the rest of the album to build a crescendo that then opens up into the opening track, which is Breathe. Breathe being the first song I saw Pink Floyd play live when I first saw them live in 2005. And Breathe is a gorgeous song. It takes some of the ideas which were in the track Breathe by Roger from the 1970 soundtrack to The Body, and Breathe is a completely different song that kind of opens up with the idea of the things that you have to do in order to stay alive, and one of those is breathe, and you can't forget to breathe. It's instinctual and built into you. So even though the lyric is breathe, breathe in the air, don't be afraid to care, there's an idea of kind of going, well, you don't have much choice about breathing. You either do it or you don't do it. You try and hold your breath. After a while, your body goes, fuck, I'm breathing anyway. So that's an important part of it. Sorry, I have a suspicion that my microphone may have fallen down there, and if it did and you couldn't hear me properly, sorry about that. That wasn't intentional at all. In fact, this is causing me a spot of bother, so I'm going to put on a cardigan, because cardigans are very middle-aged, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it better. Okay, sorry about that. I am trying with some slightly different microphone setups to see how they work, and they may or may not be successful. Obviously, in that case, it may have slipped inside my shirt, and you may have just heard mumbling noises, at which point I apologise, and I may have to go and redo this later for technical reasons. I do hope not. So Breathe is a great opening track. I know Speak to Me is the first song, but Breathe is the real first song on the album. Speak to Me is kind of like your intro, your pre-credits sequence, so to speak. And Breathe was followed live by a track called The Travel Sequence, which was an instrumental jam, which the band played many, many times on tour in 1972. Pardon me, they replaced that during the course of the tour with the track that they then retitled On the Run. And On the Run is probably my least favourite track on the LP. But actually there's very little in the way of band performance in On the Run at all. Apparently it is a sequence that's been set up by the VCS 3, which apparently was built by Peter Zinophyte, who used to work for the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, who created all those lovely noises that you'll hear in ancient episodes of Doctor Who. And it was used on Obscured by Clouds, actually. It was the first album it was used for, and on Obscured by Clouds it was used for things like drones and noises. But it's also, the VCS3 is heard on Brain Damage, Time, Any Colour You Like, but most obviously in On the Run, which to me, when the band play it live on the Run, it feels like they're not really playing it live. It feels like they're using it as an excuse to have a couple of minutes off and a scene to show on the big Mr. screen in the background. And then you have track 4, which is Time. Time being one of the many songs which has been played live to this day, and is probably being played live tonight by Roger on his tour in South America. Time was released as a single, the second single from the album in some territories. Here is a 7-inch with the edit of Time on Harvest Records. It's also backed with an edit of Us and Them. This was not released in the UK, so this is an original 1970s edition of it. It's possibly older than me. I don't know exactly when in the year it was made, but it might very well actually be older than me. So this has a total of 3 minutes 33 for the running order of Time. And Time is, when I was younger, and when I first heard of Pink Floyd and I was watching them on television, I saw, I think, the Venice concert on BBC Two one night in 1989. It was love at first ping, really. I first heard it and I thought, wow, what a band. And how come I'd never heard of them before? I was aware of the film The Wall, which didn't resonate with me when I first heard it or first saw it, because I was probably 11 or 12 the first time I saw The Wall. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to be old enough to fully take the contents of that film. But the second time, obviously, the Venice concert with the 3-piece version of the band, I felt suddenly like I'd been hit by a light, and suddenly what there was before and there was after, and I was like, this band are amazing. And also my view is, if the band plays the songs live, they're probably good songs. If they don't play the songs live, they're probably not great songs. And in those days, 1989, and bearing in mind Dark Side of the Moon was only 16 years old at that point, I was very limited in terms of what I could afford, what I could listen to. So if I bought an album, I had to find a second-hand copy of it, because a first-hand copy of it was more than my weekly pocket money. And then that was my album for the week. And I had to make sure that my purchases were limited and very, very strategic. So there's lots of bands that, as I've got older, I've got much, much deeper into their discography. Right now, I'm kind of heading deep into Rush and Motorhead. Obviously, I only like bands when they die. Absolutely typical, isn't it? But I did like Rush and Motorhead, actually, whilst they were alive. And I saw both Rush and Motorhead, and they were both fantastic in completely different ways. But I've gone deeply into them more recently. And for Pink Floyd, I was like, right, well, if they don't play anything live earlier than Dark Side of the Moon, it's probably not very good, so I'm not going to get deep into that. And it was only kind of like the mid-noughties, as perhaps I started earning a little bit more money and I had a little bit more time before streaming arrived, I decided I was going to get into the Pink Floyd albums. And I got into the pre-Dark Side era of them, and also the solo material by David and Roger and Rick and Nick. So it took a little while to explore the full discography. And also there was an element of going, if they're not making any more records, sometimes you want to hold a little bit back. Like when I heard the last David Bowie songs on the No Plan EP, I was sat there going, if I press play, I'm going to hear the last ever David Bowie song. I'm like, I don't know if I want to press play. I genuinely don't know if that's what I want to do. But of course, I did. No regrets. But there was a point where I thought, I don't actually want to hear the stuff before Dark Side of the Moon, because if it was good, the band would play it, right? And what I didn't realise is it was really bloody good. I just didn't hear it. So Time being the first major single off the album, or more correctly, when I listened to it, I was like, right, that's a single. It's was written from a realization by Roger that life was happening. So there was a time during lockdown when I started doing these when I kind of thought I was waiting for, you know, Sunday best. So I had a few albums in shrink wrap I'd never opened. I had a few things which I was like, I'll get round to watching them in a bit. And then during the midst of COVID, and when there was nothing to do and nowhere to go, and there was absolutely, you know, nothing, we were kind of like in this state of suspension in between, you know, being transported up from the planet to materialising on the USS Enterprise. We were in this weird limbo situation where effectively all we had to do was stay at home, watch the news, be appalled, and there were no shows, there were no films, there was, you know, not much in the way of books that was being released. You had to kind of look inwards and go to the past. And there was a period when I was kind of going, yeah, I'm going to go and explore things that I haven't previously heard, watched, seen, smelt or smoked. And so for me, kind of that was a period where you kind of go, right, so I'm saving things for the best or for later. And when later came, I was like, right, I'm going to go and have that experience. Now, Time was a song that's written about that realization, is that actually waiting for a sunny day or waiting for a rainy day, life's happening now, right in front of your eyes, and you need to be paying attention to it. And you need to live in that moment, which is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of nostalgia, despite what you might think about my record collection, containing a lot of very, very old records, and me being obviously a clearly very old man whose back hurts, is, from my perspective, these songs speak to me about life now, and the universal themes that come out through those songs are the things that keep me coming back to them. It's not a case of nostalgia. I have no nostalgia for being 16. Being 16 was pretty fucking rubbish for me. And being 26 was not amazing. Being 27 was atrociously bad. And being, you know, 36 was okay. 46 was pretty great, actually. Pretty great. So I'm at the point where... So... from my perspective, nostalgia is obviously you don't know how you've got to somewhere, and if you arrive somewhere and you kind of forget or kind of wipe out your history, really difficult because you don't know how you got to where you are. But at the same point, you shouldn't dwell on it. You shouldn't spend all your time in there. You know, it was what it was, and it is what it is, and we are where we are, and we're living right here and right now, and it's happening right in front of our very eyes. So we should be paying attention to that. There was a sense. I think one of the things that influenced the lyrics at the time was the idea that school is a preparation for life. Now, I have strong opinions about school. I have strong opinions about everything. I have strong opinions about school. And there's the idea that once you've graduated from school, actually life's already started. And you need to be in that moment of going, right, so this is here, this is now, this is what's happening right in front of me. And whilst regrets, as Richie Edwards said, are useless, and you can't change the past, you can only change the future. The future can start right now. And the idea people have, especially about time travel, is that you can go back in time and you can change the current day from being what it is. Well, let's have a radical approach and go, well, actually, if you change what's going on now, you can change the future. You may not necessarily get it right, but you should at least give it a try and see if it works. And it could work, and it could be really good. And you don't know until you try it. Anyway, Time is a great song. It has a lovely and brilliant, probably the best on-record drum solo, which I've got in my record collection. I haven't seen that many drum solos live. I think I saw Neil Peart do one at the NEC in 1992. I think I saw this, or the intro to Time, although that's part of the song. I saw a Guns N' Roses tribute band in Wolverhampton in about 1999. Do a drum solo. Not so sure about that, I think. I've seen very few drum solos. Oh no, I saw Motorhead do one in the middle of Dr. Rock when I saw them as well. So I've seen four drum solos in my life, if you count Time. Obviously, I've seen Time played a number of times by various drummers. It does have a brilliant rototom introduction, which works in terms of building the song up and then escalating it before the snare kicks in, and then the song itself actually starts. Intros to songs are really, really important. They build in and put in the individual instruments over time before they then kind of like hit the ground and really kind of go for it. So it's very important to make sure you have good intros for songs, and Time is one of the best intros that there absolutely is. There's a reprise of Breathe, so Time goes into the track Breathe, Reprise. Now, Breathe, Reprise isn't mentioned in the track list on here, by the way. So, looking at the track list on the vinyl LP there, it goes Time and then The Great Gig in the Sky. But the lyrics right at the bottom tell you that there's a reprise to Breathe, which is, again, a single verse that leads to a conclusion. I've put Breathe and the Breathe reprise together, and it has been played live that way, I think. And you can do it, but it's not a smooth transition because there's a difference in the instrumentation. So it doesn't make it feel like it feels like it's two halves of one whole as opposed to one whole that's been cut into two halves. And then the last track on side one is The Great Gig in the Sky, which also was known for a period of time as the Mortality sequence. It's a solo piano piece written by Rick that was originally called the Violence sequence, that was taken from a rejected or unused outtake from Zabriskie Point. I think it was Zabriskie Point. And it was played live as an instrumental with various pieces of recorded speech over it. So, for example, some of the live versions of it featured sermons, readings from, I think, Ecclesiastes, which is one of the books in the Bible, and then the vocal was added last in the process. So Claire Torrey was brought in for a day, vocalised a series of vocal instrumentals, much like a guitar solo, but with a voice, a wordless set of ascending and descending kind of motifs over the song, and then was added, and then that was on the final mix of the track. Claire was paid £30 for it, and there was a court case around that because, according to the writing credits on the original version of the album, it was a Rick Wright solo composition. Although it did say vocals on The Great Gig in the Sky by Claire Torrey, backing vocals by Doris Troy, Leslie Duncan, Lisa Strike, and Barry St. John. So, and all lyrics by Roger Waters. So the album as such, The Great Gig in the Sky, being paid only £30 for it, and bearing in mind that the album's now sold 50 million copies, effectively you're being paid £1 for every million or so copies of the album that have been sold. Bit of a swizz. But that was resolved in an out-of-court settlement, and I think there's a change in the writing credits. Now we'll check when we get to the Immersion edition from 2011. And because it was a Rick Wright solo composition, The Great Gig in the Sky is to date the only Pink Floyd song that a member of Pink Floyd has licensed for advertising use, I think. And there was an advert for, I think, a headache tablet called, I think, Nurofen, which was in 1990. Rick and Claire went back into the studio to re-record it for a huge amount of money, and a 30-second version of it was used as an advert. So there's a re-recording of Great Gig in the Sky from 1990 by Rick and Claire Torrey, which was only ever used on an advert. Little known pop fact there, kids. And I'll post a link to the advert in the comments down there so you can hear it. The side 2 of the LP then starts with no, actually, I'm going to say something that I do remember. Is David Gilmour was asked about The Great Gig in the Sky. The band played it on the 1988, 89 and 94 tours. And in one of those Q Cash for Questions things, David was asked, do you ever listen to The Great Gig in the Sky and think, oh, shut up? And the answer was sometimes yes and sometimes no. And I'd love to hear an instrumental version of The Great Gig in the Sky without Claire's vocals on, just to see what the difference would be like. And I think the first time I saw The Great Gig in the Sky performed live by a member of Pink Floyd was at the Royal Albert Hall in 2006, when I saw David Gilmour and Rick Wright on their respective solo tour. Misha Paris, I think, sang the vocals on it that night and was unrehearsed. So it wasn't used on the DVD, which is the only song performed live over the residency at the Royal Albert Hall in 2006 that isn't on the DVD release, by the way, presumably because the vocals were never quite satisfactory. Let's flip the album over to side 2, Pod Piggers. The track is called Money. It is a classic Pink Floyd song that has been played live by Pink Floyd, by Roger, by David. And pretty much everybody on the planet has had a crack at playing Money, and it wasn't released as a single in the UK. It was released as a single in France. Here's a 1973 7-inch version of it there with a hole in the middle. for your jukebox money, and has the lyrics on there using this cover. It was also, by the way, released as a single in 1981 to go alongside the compilation album, A Great Collection of Dance Songs. And A Great Collection of Dance Songs did have a commercial release of it. There's Money, the 12-inch, backed with, unsurprisingly, any colour you like. And this was called an edited version. It wasn't. It was, for boring and tedious contractual reasons, Money was not authorised to be on the Great Collection of Dance Songs album in 1981. I think Capitol in the US had the rights to it, and the rest of the world it was licensed to a different company. And the different company then achieved worldwide rights for Pink Floyd, so Capitol wouldn't license the original 1973 version of Money for A Great Collection of Dance Songs. So a alternate version had to be created. David Gilmour went into the studio and recorded it largely solo. Dick Parry came back and reprised his saxophone element. And whilst it says written by Roger Waters, produced by Pink Floyd, saxophone by Dick Parry, only the fact that it says produced by Pink Floyd on there kind of betrays the fact that it's actually a completely different recording of the track. It's as sound-alike as you can get. And it's very good, very interesting, but slightly different, which the trained ear will hear. So Money is a great song. 7/8 time, unusual time signature. Bugger to play if you're not, if you're a conventional rock drummer. I've heard a couple of bad cover versions of Money. Most people don't touch it, actually, which is probably for the best. And there is a solo demo of it on the Dark Side of the Moon making of DVD that was released in 2003. So that's Money. That's the second song I saw Pink Floyd play live at Hyde Park in 2005 there, which I never thought I'd get to see Pink Floyd ever live, let alone twice, which I did. So Money's a great song. And it has this weird thing, it kind of fades out into nothingness. As it fades out into nothingness, we then have the next song, which is Us and Them. Us and Them is an absolutely pivotal song in Pink Floyd's body of work. It is quite literally the middle point by which everything that Pink Floyd do afterwards is in some way informed by that particular song. It's the second song which Roger has written, which really details the loss of his father. So his father died in, I think, Anzio in 1944 in the Second World War. A theme that is circled quite comprehensively in both the Final Cut and the Wall albums. But it's a pivotal moment. That is the second song which addresses really the consequences of war. The first one being the not amazing Corporal Clegg in 1968 from Saucer Full of Secrets. And Us and Them has a lyric that is I think one of the most powerful lyrics that there is, but also a lyric that Roger himself has said kind of influenced everything else he ever wrote afterwards, which is with, without, and who'll deny it's what the fighting's all about. And that lyric around the who has and who hasn't, and the power imbalance that affects that in terms of who has access to food, money, clothing, power, influence, home, all those type of things. That is the key lyric, I think, in the whole of the album, is that the rest of the album sits upon a discussion around what is and isn't, who has and who hasn't, and how do we respond to that, and that kind of battle between, excess and just enough. And if you want to get deep into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're probably a psychologist, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of lists the needs that people have and the order and priority in which they have. And if you don't solve, for example, if you don't solve number 3, you're definitely not even going to be thinking about number 1. So number 3 might be something like food, money, shelter, housing, for example. If you don't have those, that's your priority. If you do have those, then you start to think about things like self-actualization, self-image, respect, prestige. And if you don't have a house, you don't really care about prestige. You're kind of like, well, I want some food and I want somewhere to sleep. Home again. I like to be here when I can, and it's good to warm my bones beside the fire. Really good track, Us and Them. And as I said before, it also appeared as the B-side to Time. So the B-side of Time, there is Us and Them, again on the 7-inch in edited form, this time running for 3 minutes 18 seconds before it fades out. Us and Them also paraphrases the lyric from Echoes. So the lyric from Echoes, it goes by chance to strangers meet walking separately down by the street, etc., etc. And there's the line in here which is in Us and Them, which is out of the way, it's a busy day, I've got things on my mind, for want of the price of tea and a slice the old man died. The lyric, which is probably one of the ones which kind of also implies that idea of us and them, the people around us, whoever we are. And when you think about the concept of identity and reality, you kind of break people into two. There's people and there's not people. I've heard the phrase that, people, right? And like the biggest compliment anyone can pay anyone is just, you're not people, because people are different. And when you think about people as a concept, other people are people that you don't have inside your group of either, friends, lovers, relations, or people that you're relatives with, right? Everyone else is just people, they're strangers, right? And it's impossible for everybody to know everybody. It said that the average person really truly knows maybe about 150 people. The average person maybe only has maybe a smallish number of actual genuine friends, a wider circle of acquaintances, and then outside that, people that they kind of know. And then there's strangers, whoever they are. Like if you knew every single person that was at a gig, that'd blow your absolute mind, wouldn't it? If you were sat there going, well, I know every single one of the 4,000 people that are here. Firstly, how do you get the space in your brain to do that? And secondly, that must be bloody weird. And so, for example, when I saw Faith No More in 2009, at Brixton Academy, the first reunion show that they played, I ended up knowing there was about 50 people there that I knew. And there was 4,000 people that were actually there. So I knew like 1% of the crowd. And that was freaky to think about. There are 40 or 50 people here who I know and have spoken to and am friends with. And it felt very, very different from when you go and see maybe 80,000 people on, let's say, Hyde Park or Wembley Stadium. And like 4 people that are going. Or if there's, for example, when Take That did the stadium tour in 2011 and they played Wembley Stadium for 8 nights. So I knew people that were going every single night. It's just the night that I went, I knew like 5 people. And then other nights there were like 10 people I knew that were there. And some nights there were like 2 people. But somebody I knew was there every single night. I went one of the nights because Pet Shop Boys were supporting. And it seemed like an excellent day out. And it absolutely was. It was a lovely way to see my birthday. So Us and Them is that concept of both people and not people. The people that you know and the people that you don't know. And the people that you know aren't people. They're better than that. You know them better and differently. And the people that you don't know are just this amorphous mass of human beings, NPCs in a video game of your own life that you probably won't ever interact with. An NPC is a non-playable character in a video game. So there's about this inherent balance between humanity and strangers, between resources and denial of those resources. And Us and Them is a song that really kind of pulls out very clearly the idea that there are people and not people, and there's a battle for the resources in the world, which of course is the main reason for every significant conflict that there is somebody's got something that you want and you're going to take it from them by force. And it could be through an army, and it could be through money, and it could be through law, it could be through any one of a dozen reasons. But that is the core crux of it. Track 8 is Any Colour You Like. Any Colour You Like, B-side, by the way, to Money, which is strange, is a fabulous instrumental workout. On here, it's 3 minutes 11 seconds of absolutely squiddly prog rock goodness. I've seen Any Colour You Like played live by Roger Waters a couple of times, and it's a fantastic track. I absolutely love it. The definitive take, by the way, is the Live at Wembley version that was released in 2011 on the Immersion editions and the Discovery editions or Experience editions of the albums, the 2 CD versions. And later in the 2023 standalone Dark Side of the Moon live release, which somewhat oddly, I think got to number 1 in the charts and sold 81,000 physical copies in the UK the week it was released 6 months ago. So Any Colour You Like comes in 2 forms. Really, there's the 1973 studio version, 3 minutes 11 seconds on Dark Side of the Moon. Hello, I'm Dark Side of the Moon. And the 8-minute version with an extended guitar solo by Gilmour that's on the 1974 live recordings from Wembley. And the 1974 version is, in my opinion, the definitive take of the album. By the time Pink Floyd were playing Dark Side of the Moon again in 1994, it had gone back down to 3 minutes. So there you have it. And then we have Brain Damage and Eclipse. And these are probably the two most focused moments on the career. Now, if I correct, Brain Damage is the only song that has a solely lead vocal by Roger, the creative genius of Pink Floyd, if you listen to him and not if you listen to other people. The idea of a song around lunacy and the concepts of reality, and if you think deeply around what is and isn't acceptable forms of behaviour, is sanity or the lack thereof a relative concept that's linked to other people's perceptions in what's called a consensus reality. Consensus reality is that idea that reality that exists is the one that everyone agrees on. And then if you follow Douglas Adams, his concept of Wonko the Sane is that Wonko built the asylum, or more correctly, he built the house that was sanity and the notion of madness, and everybody outside of his house was insane. And actually, I frequently identify with Wonko the Sane, or as Will Sinnott from the Shaman, their fabulous bass player who died before his time, once said, and he had been a psychiatric nurse, he said that actually the core personality of the outside world is actually psychopathic, and it's actually the people that are inside the asylums that are often the sanest people because they've got an appropriate response to an inappropriate reality. Well, that blew my mind when I was 18 and I read that interview in Melody Maker. And then we have Eclipse. Eclipse, I think, was a bit influential on U2's track Walk On, the idea of all that you touch and all that you see and all that you taste and all that you feel, etc., etc. And it's just this lovely coda to everything else, and it ends with the line that everything under the sun is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And I mean, I think it's to that point, the best Pink Floyd album that there is. It's the most focused, it's the most cohesive. I wouldn't change the track listing, I wouldn't change the mixes, I wouldn't change anything about it whatsoever. And the whole thing is kind of tied together with this wonderful concept, or this idea of exploring reality, the nature of reality, and what is and isn't a sane response to what could be an insane world. The album is stitched together with spoken word samples. There were questions that were made to members of the band's crew, members of the band's wings, including, I think, Paul and Linda McCartney, who weren't used because their voices were so distinctive and noticeable, asking questions like, are you afraid of dying? Do you ever think you're going mad? When you had a fight, were you in the right? And then you end up with these isolated little kind of segments of voices which just come out and answer the open-ended questions in a way that allows them to explore elements of reality. So for example, Henry McCulloch from Wings, I think, is the guy that goes, and there is no dark side of the moon, it's all dark. And then Paul and Linda weren't used because both their voices were very distinctive, but also they were very guarded in their answers, because Paul, having been a Beatle, knows all about being misquoted, when as soon as you say it's not Jesus I mind, it's his fans, and you end up with, well, obviously that wasn't Paul, that was John Lennon. People end up burning your records, and they buy them again when they were actually quite like the Beatles. So the cover, by the way, was also inspired by a physics textbook, and there at one point in the 80s, the album was so popular on CD that apparently there was a production line that EMI were running that did nothing but produce copies of Dark Side of the Moon, because it was actually a reference copy CD. So when CDs came in the 80s, the first thing that lots of people did was they bought Dark Side of the Moon on CD, and they bought this edition, the one that I've got here, the first. This one here just has 1984 on it, or more correctly, it has 1973. It doesn't have a barcode on it. It has a very basic panel booklet, and it just has, the text that's on the sleeve there. And then later in 1992, and then tying in with the band's 1994-1995 remastering program, where everything was regularized and standardized, the album got a different release, this time with a slightly different cover, and with more care and attention and photographs put into the booklet, and the picture disc CD. So that was the second CD mastering of the album. The first one I don't think was changed at all. I think they used a cassette master for the widest dynamic range for the CD. So, as there were no UK singles from Dark Side of the Moon, there were no hits from Dark Side of the Moon, although of course Money and Us and Them and Time became frequently played on the radio. There was also a 2003 30th anniversary Super Audio CD, which contained, I think, an alternate mix of the album. And there was also the making of Dark Side of the Moon, which was released as a documentary DVD. I have the documentary DVD, however, if I go and get it, I have to stand up and then I have to show you my midriff, and I don't want to do that to you. Oh, I've knocked something over. And then in 2011 came the first of the major mega Pink Floyd box sets that came with with what was called the Discovery reissue program, which saw what's called immersion editions of 3 of the albums. The first one of these was Dark Side of the Moon. So this was the immersion edition that was released in 2011. And whilst it had a big tag on it, it was only £60. The 50th anniversary edition of Dark Side of the Moon retailed for a ridiculous £250 and contained not 1 second of new audio on the 2023 edition. Contained a Dobly Atmos-mixed, which, if that excites you, great. A fool and his money are easily parted. Let's go into the immersion edition, because this is the first album-specific Pink Floyd box set that there is. And let's see what's inside there. Basically, you don't need to buy the 2023 version. Find a copy of the immersion edition if you can. So first thing that we have in there, well, we have some nice fluffy protective stuff to stop the contents getting beaten up. Let's take that out. We have some coasters. Now, why are there Pink Floyd coasters in this? Well, Pink Floyd coasters are in here for the same reason that there's some Pink Floyd marbles. And the reason there are Pink Floyd marbles is because when people kind of bootleg or counterfeit these things, these are going to push the production cost up. There's certainly no valid reason for there being any Pink Floyd marbles in any Pink Floyd bloody box set. This is just a music delivery system, and it's an extravagant and expensive way of doing so. We have a memorabilia card in here, which features, let's just quickly check, a backstage pass for the tour, which of course you cannot use. And there is also some collector's cards. I don't quite know who would actually go and buy every single copy of the album to get all of the collector's cards. So there's a series of 57 different cards. This one features a photograph from the Wish You Were Here era. This one features the echoes. This features a horse on the head in order to explore the Floyd phrase, first men in space. And here is a photograph of Pink Floyd as airmen, as well as a reproduction ticket from the Rainbow Theatre shows. Not that necessarily anybody would need those. If any fool was going to buy 20 copies of this to get all of the Pink Floyd postcards, you're an idiot. Yep, I said it. But you know what? I'm right. There's a Pink Floyd scarf. If you really, really needed a Pink Floyd scarf, I don't think anybody would need it. This has never been opened, this Pink Floyd scarf, and quite rightly so, because it is, again, a ridiculous and decadent waste of money. When Stephen Burkhoff, as the Russian general in Octopussy, says the vest is decadent, he's talking exactly about this box set, by the way. We also have a Dark Side of the Moon lithograph, I think, or a Liechtenstein version of Dark Side of the Moon. That's very nice, isn't it? You can frame that and stick that on your wall, alongside a piece of paper that will tell you about all the audio and visual that's inside the immersion set. So let's go into that. We just need to quickly get through here, go straight to the audio, and then we'll get to the last bits of assorted guff that are inside here. So we have on CD number 1, we have the album, as is the 2011 master version of the record there, which is, hang on a second, I just need to take this out because there are 6 discs inside this set. So we have disc number 1, the 2011 master of Dark Side of the Moon. Disc number 2 here is the Live at Wembley BBC set. So this was recorded for the BBC in November 1974 at Wembley Empire Pool, now also known as Wembley Arena. There was an issue with miking up the bass drum, so I think they took the bass drum from a previous night's recording and inserted it into this, which is pretty exciting. Then we have disc 3, which is DVD, and this is audio only, so it features a 5.1 surround mix from 2003 and a stereo mix from 1973 and the quad mix from 1973 in 5 different configurations. We also have a DVD here, disc 4. This DVD contains a couple of songs recorded in Brighton in 1972, The Dark Side of the Moon 2003 documentary from the making of Dark Side of the Moon, concert screen films, which were shown on the screens in 1973 and 1994, and then a 5.1 mix of the concert screen films as well. So that's your fourth disc. There's 2 extra discs. Disc 5 is not this one. Disc 5 is a Blu-ray. This features all of the content that's on the 2 DVDs there, by the way, in a slipcase. You think all that money and they couldn't make a 6-panel set? Quite surprising. And then disc 5, I love the artwork on this, by the way. This is disc 6, so this is unreleased audio, which features an alternate version of the album, an early mix from 1972, extra audio tracks, including 3 live at Brighton, the travel sequence, the mortality sequence, that's the Great Gig in the Sky, Any Colour You Like, which at that point was a full-man jam, and then a previously unreleased version of the travel sequence, the demo of Money by Roger Waters, and the Us and Them demo. So when I was talking about the violence sequence, it is the Richard Wright demo on there, as well as a track called The Hard Way, which was taken from the Household Objects Project, which is an abandoned album. We have a booklet with credits. Lovely. We have another couple of books in here. We also have, and let's quickly go for these now, we have what's called Questions for Assorted Lunatics. So these are the questions that people were asked. So, are you afraid of dying? When were your last violence? Were you in the right? Do you ever think you're going mad? If not, why? End of story. And a whole bunch of questions there. Not quite sure why that needs to be in there, but so be it. This is actually a really brilliant expanded version of an album, unlike the 2023 edition that just has photographs and not very much in the way of additional audio. We have a nice little booklet here which features basically an expanded version of the album artwork. Oh man, isn't that nice? That's a lovely bit of artwork, that, isn't it? I really love that. There. And also then we have Pink Floyd on tour, photographs by Jill Furmanansky and Hypnosis. And so if you're going to get any version of Dark Side of the Moon in an expanded form, go for the 2011 Immersion edition. The 2023 version only exists if you absolutely desperately need to spend a lot of money on a record you've already got and you've run out of things to spend your money on, at which point send some money to me, because I can think of things I'd like to spend my money on that I can't because I haven't got enough of it. Moan, moany, moan. But the Immersion set is great. The 2023 set absolutely isn't. So where does the 2023 set go wrong? Well, it's got a new Dobly Atmos mix. It's got reproduction 7 inches of these, which you can pick these up, by the way, for about £15 on Discogs each. But the Blu-ray is a standalone with the Atmos mix. The book now stands alone. The live release live at Wembley has been released in a standalone fashion. You don't get the quad mix, you don't get the early mix, and you don't get the demos on the 2023 version. So basically, go for the Immersion mix on the Immersion box set here, if you can find a copy. As a word to the wise, I think some of the Blu-rays are starting to deteriorate due to a manufacturing issue, so be careful on those. And aside from that, that's pretty much it, really. That's Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I've got 5 of the 50 million copies which have been sold, which means I have 1 in every 10 million copies, which is pretty surprising, really. I didn't think I had quite so many copies of it. But then I did forget, I had the cassette here as well. And the next time that we talk, I'm going to be talking about the Wish You Were Here album for Pink Floyd, which also, by the way, they were on the 1973 tour at Wembley. They did start performing some extra tracks. So 3 songs from an upcoming album. Here's the Pink Floyd 1974 bootleg LP that was absolutely enormous and sold loads of copies in 1975. And this featured 3 songs. I think these were recorded in Stoke at the Trentham Gardens, which I've been to, featuring Raving and Drooling, Gotta Be Crazy, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Shine On You Crazy Diamond appears on The Animals, appears on Wish You Were Here, and Raving and Drooling and You've Gotta Be Crazy appear in slightly different forms on the Animals album, and I will be talking about those coming up shortly. So, thanks for watching, take care of yourselves and each other, stay beautiful, and I will see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.